You know, this deep dive starts with something that's, well, it's genuinely jarring when you first hear it.
Mhm.
The idea that in this day and age, simply viewing or retweeting something online can be treated as a serious crime.
And land you in prison.
Exactly. We're talking about the case of Chen Jingwan. He's a PhD scholar, specializes in nonlinear complex systems, and he was sentenced to 1 year and 8 months for a charge called Sumsin Zishizui.
And that charge, since Zishizui, it's so important to understand that from the get-go.
Right.
The literal translation is picking quarrels and provoking trouble, but, critics often call it a pocket crime.
A pocket crime. What does that mean?
It means it's deliberately broad, it's flexible, so it could be, pulled out of a pocket and applied to almost any kind of expression that the authorities decide is unacceptable.
I see. In this case, it's not just a straightforward legal battle. We have a mountain of sources here.
A huge amount. We've got the official court documents, the indictment, the verdict, the appellate ruling.
But we're also digging into the defendant's own defense letters. I mean, including that really raw document he wrote from jail, the in-jail self-defense and accusation blood letter.
And critically, we're filtering all of this through some pretty cutting-edge analysis from psychology, from complexity theory, even international law.
So our mission, really, is to unpack how this happened. How an intellectual act, just sharing or viewing something, was prosecuted as a major crime.
Yeah, exploring that collision between legal procedure, intellectual freedom, and, well, human psychology.
So let's start with the official record. Who exactly is Chen Jingwan?
Okay, so Chen Jingwen, born in 1976. He has a PhD in science, and his specialty is this highly abstract, field nonlinear complex systems.
Okay.
He calls himself an independent scholar. And the court documents, they place his arrest in Kunming, but it seems he mostly lived in Shanghai.
And the charge itself, it wasn't for a single tweet, right? It covered a long
A
period.
very long period, almost 3 years, from mid-2019 to early 2022. The indictment states he used what they call flipping software.
Which is just a VPN.
Right, a VPN. And that he used it to scatter what the court called false information and disrupt social order on a blocked social media site.
So the trial court finds him guilty.
Yes, the Xishan People's Court, guilty of Sungsin Zishizui. And in April 2023, they hand down that sentence. 1 year and 8 months.
And this is where the court's reasoning gets, well, it gets really interesting.
It's essential to understand this because it's a profound twist in legal logic. The whole judgment really hinged on his subjective intent.
Okay, so what was their argument for his intent?
They argued that because Chen had a very high education and knowledge level, he should have known
Should have known what?
that the content, which they described as insulting, attacking the core leadership and current political system, was, quote, false information,
Yeah.
and that sharing it would cause, quote, severe public disorder.
Hold on, let me get this straight. His high level of education wasn't a good thing.
No.
It was actually used as proof of malicious intent.
Precisely. The logic is, you're smart, therefore you're knowingly guilty. It wasn't just that he shared it. It's that because he's a scholar, he must have done it with malice.
That is just staggering. It flips everything on its head. The more you know, the more legally vulnerable you become.
It's a paradox,
Mhm.
and it fundamentally challenges the principle of equality before the law. You're holding people with advanced degrees to a totally different and much stricter standard of guilt.
So what happened when he appealed? Did he get a chance to challenge this logic?
He did appeal, but the Kunming Intermediate People's Court, they upheld the sentence.
Mhm.
And here's the key procedural point. They decided not to hold an open court hearing for the appeal.
So the first trial was closed to the public.
Yes.
And the appeal was just a paper review, no hearing.
That's right. The ruling just said the original decision had, and I'm quoting here, clear facts, solid and sufficient evidence, accurate conviction, and appropriate sentencing.
So they just rubber stamped it.
They affirmed the conviction, yeah. And in doing so, they bypassed any chance to publicly test Chen's objections to the facts and the law.
Okay, so the official record is closed. But Chen himself, he opens up this whole other front, his defense.
He launches a complete intellectual counterattack. You see it especially in that blood letter where he calls the system a judicial mafia. His defense is so methodical, like a scientist deconstructing a problem.
He goes after the three core elements of the crime.
Exactly. First, the objective act itself, the false information.
How do you even begin to argue against that?
Well, he says the court is making a category error. It's confusing facts with opinions, with art. So he splits his posts into two groups.
Okay, what's the first group?
The first is what he calls artistic works or subjective emotion. Think of like the Umbrella Girl comic or photos of candle memorials.
Things that don't have a truth value.
Exactly. You can't fact-check a symbol. You can't prove a cartoon is false. He argued that calling a subjective feeling a rumor is just a logical impossibility.
That's a powerful point. And the second category, the more academic stuff.
He calls that rational recognition or academic theory. So these were his posts about, say, the political spectrum or critical analyses of policy.
So opinions and debate.
Right. He said these are just points of view. They're hypotheses. If two economists disagree on a policy, one of them isn't spreading false information. They're having a debate.
And what was his final conclusion on this? About who has the burden of proof?
His point was, first, only a statement of fact can even be proven false. And second, and this is key, he argued it's the police's job to fact-check, not the citizens. He's saying you can't put the burden on every single person to be an investigative journalist before they share something. It would just paralyze all speech.
Okay, that covers the content. So now, the subjective intent. How did he fight back against that idea of high education equals guilt?
He completely inverted their logic. He used his own mind as the evidence. He said his scientific training gives him scientific skepticism.
Skepticism toward everything.
Toward all information, no matter where it comes from. He even references Plato, saying, I am but a prisoner in the cave.
Meaning he can't be certain about the ultimate truth of anything he sees.
Precisely. So he argued, how can I knowingly affirm that a controversial political statement is true or false? My skepticism makes it impossible for me to have the kind of certainty the court requires for knowing malice.
So he's saying his scholarly mind is the reason he can't be guilty of knowing malice.
Yes. He accused the court of using objective guilt, judging him on the outcome, and even more powerfully, identity guilt.
Identity guilt. Can you unpack that for us?
Sure. Think of it like this. Instead of proving this man committed the crime, they're arguing this man is a certified genius, so he must have known what he was doing was criminal, and therefore we don't need as much evidence of his actual intent. His PhD became the evidence of his criminal mind.
That's profound. And then he moves to the final piece. The harm. The idea that his tweets cause severe disorder.
And this is where it gets really fascinating because he brings his own field of study complex systems theory into the courtroom.
He uses science to rebut a legal claim.
He does. He uses concepts like self-organized criticality or SOC and the CIP theorem.
Okay, you're going to have to explain how something called self-organized criticality applies to Twitter.
Right. Well, SOC is basically a theory about how systems reach a tipping point, how a small event, like a single grain of sand, can trigger a huge avalanche.
The snowball effect.
Exactly. And Chen argues that for a social system to have one of these avalanches or severe disorder, certain conditions have to be met. The system has to be unstable, and the input has to be able to spread.
And his argument was it couldn't.
He pointed to two hard facts. One, his account had very few followers. Two, the platform itself is blocked.
Yeah.
You need special software to even see it.
So limited audience on a closed-off platform.
Precisely. In scientific terms, he argued his posts couldn't possibly meet the requirements to trigger a systemic event. They just didn't have the reach or the influence.
And he had real-world proof, too, not just theory.
He did. He pointed out that the so-called criminal evidence, the posts themselves, were still online, just sitting there, completely unattended, even after he was convicted.
The ultimate proof that they caused no disorder.
It was his empirical evidence. He said, look, if these posts were so dangerous, why are they still up? Their continued existence proves they had no measurable social impact.
So the court looked at his diploma and saw a criminal. He looked at the court and saw a total failure of logic.
Yes, which forces us to ask why. Why did the system reject this logic? And that's where we have to shift lenses from law to psychology.
Okay, let's unpack that. What was going on inside the minds of the people in the judicial system?
Well, we can start with Chen's own personality profile, using the Big Five model. His behavior is classic. Extremely high openness, that's intellectual curiosity, exploring ideas, and high conscientiousness, being driven by principles, by logic.
Healthy traits for a scholar.
You would think so. But the system took these healthy traits and it pathologized them.
How so?
It redefined high openness as subversion.
Yep.
It redefined his conscientiousness, his adherence to logic, as knowing malice. The conviction wasn't just a sentence. It was a violent reconstruction of his identity from scholar to criminal.
So it's less about punishing an act and more about dismantling a person psychologically.
I think that's a fair way to put it. And this is driven by some powerful cognitive biases. The analysis points to severe confirmation bias.
They only looked for evidence that proved he was guilty.
Exactly. They focus on he used a VPN, he has a PhD, the content is critical, and they just ignored everything else. The academic motive, the low follower count, the lack of actual impact. They weren't searching for truth, they were confirming a hypothesis.
And then there's the other bias, the
The fundamental attribution error, FAE. It's the tendency to explain someone's behavior by their internal character, their personality, instead of the external situation.
So they saw his actions not as academic inquiry, but as proof of a malicious, disloyal character.
Correct. They attributed everything to his supposed malicious intent and ignored the entire context of academic discourse and the need to access diverse information. It's the mental shortcut that lets you turn curiosity into a crime.
And this isn't just one person with a bias, it's a systemic thing.
Oh, absolutely. Social psychology gives us the bigger picture. The analysis suggests the system was operating under immense pressure, leading to obedience to authority and groupthink.
So individual people in the system, prosecutors, clerks, maybe even judges, they transfer their personal moral responsibility upwards.
Right. I'm just following the rules of the system. And groupthink means you suppress your own doubts to maintain harmony with the group's narrative.
So even if someone thought, this case feels thin, they wouldn't speak up.
It's unlikely. And the result is what the analysis calls a personality toxic environment. It's an environment that actively attacks the basic psychological needs we all have for autonomy and competence. By punishing his intelligence, the system assaulted his very competence as a scholar.
So the application of this pocket crime wasn't just a legal move, it was a psychological tool to enforce conformity.
It's a very powerful one. When the law becomes this subjective, using phrases like should have known, the line between academic freedom and crime just isn't. It evaporates.
So zooming out, what are the implications here? This case seems to be a perfect example of using an ambiguous law to control opinion.
It creates huge conflicts with core legal principles.
Oh.
Domestically, with China's own constitution, specifically equality before the law. As we said, punishing someone for their education completely undermines that.
And internationally, the secret trial, the lack of a real appeal.
That absolutely raises concerns. It goes against the spirit of international standards like the ICCPR, the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, which guarantees the right to a fair and public trial.
And finally, that blood letter he wrote, that last act of resistance.
It's seen as his final push for what psychologist Erik Erikson called ego integrity.
Affirming his life's meaning.
Yes, affirming his intellectual dignity in the face of this systemic injustice. It transforms his own tragedy into this psychological testament to judicial irrationality. He's refusing to accept the label of criminal they tried to force on him.
It's just so clear from this deep dive. When a legal system starts using subjective feelings, should have known, serious chaos, without objective proof, it stops being about justice. It becomes a tool for psychological and intellectual destruction.
And I think the most powerful takeaway from all this analysis is that the real damage to society here wasn't from a scholar's retweets on a blocked website.
No.
The real harm was from the system's willingness to dismantle an individual's cognitive integrity, their very ability to think and to question. The psychological analysis argues that to stop this from happening again, you have to build safeguards against these negative psychological patterns, bias, groupthink into the justice system itself.
It really makes you think about the moral weight of knowledge and how fragile the line between opinion, fact, and crime becomes when those psychological safeguards fail. If the very act of applying specialized knowledge can be seen as criminal intent, what does that mean for any advanced society? That's something to really consider. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive.